Welcome, friends. Please silence your phones. Today's presentation is on imagination. The next two Sundays, August 5 and August 12, the lights will be closed. The last two Sundays of August, 19 and 25 the dates, there will be roundtable readings and discussions on studies in the secret doctrine. On September 2, we will start our fall program with an 11 a.m. presentation on the three fundamentals and objects, and at 12:30 p.m. a continuation of our studies in the secret doctrine. All work of this lodge is aimed at passing on, in their purity, teachings of the ancient message from the Masters of Wisdom that HPB named Theosophy. Each of us has the opportunity in our own way to assimilate this powerful and common sense message, thus making it a living power in their every thought and action. Please help yourselves and the future of humanity by your attendance, time, and money to keep alive and thriving these uplifting teachings that lay the foundation for putting this dark age behind us and ushering in the golden age. We are located in the Washington, D.C. area at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Bethesda, Maryland, 20814, Suite 230. We are guided by the declaration that Robert Crosby used in 1909 to launch the ULT and return the teachings to the lines laid down by the great founders through their messenger, HPB, and her staunch colleague, William Q. Judge. To this end, we work independently and with each other to achieve a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. We hold that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching. We neither have constitution, bylaws, nor offices. The sole bond being between its associates is the furtherance of unity. All who are engaged in the true service of humanity are regarded as Theosophists, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and we welcome to our association all those who are in accord with the purposes in our declaration, which was just summarized, and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Bhagavad Gita, starting on page 106. It is even a portion of myself, which having assumed life in this world of conditioned existence, draweth it together the five senses and the mind, in order that it may obtain a body and may leave it again. And those are carried by the Sovereign Lord to and for whatever body, and to and from whatever body he enters or quits, even as the breeze bears the fragrance from the flower. Presiding over the eye, the ear, the touch, the taste, and the power of smelling, and also over the mind, he experiences the objects of sense. The deluded do not see the spirit when it quitteth or remains in the body. nor when moved by the qualities it has experienced in the world. For those who have the eye of wisdom perceive it, and devotees who industriously strive to do so see it dwelling in their own hearts. Whilst those who have not overcome themselves, who are devoid of discrimination, see it not, even though they strive thereafter. Know that the brilliance of the sun, which illuminateth the whole world, and the light which is in the moon and in the fire, are the splendor of myself. I enter the earth, supporting all living things by my power, and I am that property of sap which is taste, nourishing all the herbs and plants of the field. Becoming the internal fire of the living, I associate with the upward and downward breathing, and cause the four kinds of food to digest. I am in the hearts of all men, and from me come memory, knowledge, and also the loss of both. I am to be known by the Vedas. I am he who is the author of the Vedanta, and I alone am the interpreter of the Vedas. There are two kinds of beings in the world: the divisible, the one divisible, and the other indivisible. The divisible is all things and the creatures. The indivisible is called Kutasa, or he who standeth on high, unaffected. But there is another spirit designated as the Supreme Spirit, Paramatma, which permeates and sustains the three worlds. As I am above the divisible and also superior to the indivisible, therefore both in the world and in the Vedas am I known as the Supreme Spirit. He who being not deluded knoweth me thus as the Supreme Spirit, knoweth all things, and worships me under every form and condition. Thus, O sinless one, have I declared unto thee this most sacred science. He who understandeth it, O son of Bharata, will be a wise man and a performer of all that is to be done. And now for today's talk on imagination.
Good morning and welcome, friends. The root of this word is Latin. It's imaginary. It's Latin. It means to picture oneself. Maybe I should put that up here too. To picture oneself. So it is the ability of the mind to build mental scenes, objects, or events that do not exist, are not present, or have not happened in the past. The professor and director of the Science Imagination Lab at Carleton University believes that imagination is used in a whole variety of cognitive processes, including planning, hypothetical reasoning, picturing things in the past or in the future, in design and creativity, in engineering and the arts. According to the Theosophical teachings, imagination is a faculty of the mind, and we know that the mind is lighted in human beings only. This doesn't mean that intelligence to some degree does not exist in the other kingdoms, but the mind is only lighted in the human kingdom. So, lighting of manas belongs to humanity. So, imagination then is a faculty of that presence of the mind in humanity. But according to the New Scientist magazine, some researchers who study apes and other tool-making animals like crows say that these animals can solve problems without resorting to trial and error, and they think that imagination occurs in them. They wonder if chimpanzees and other animals conceive of something that is present, or perhaps think of what happened yesterday, but they do not know. So then, everybody possesses the faculty of imagination, but its expression varies from person to person. So, the faculty is present in all of us, but its use differs from person to person. So when we see children playing make-believe, they're actually exercising this faculty of imagination. Sometimes you see kids when like a washing machine or refrigerator gets delivered to the house in a big box, they take the big box and they make a train, a car or something out of it, and they play in it for hours, and here's all the things you purchase for them, but they use the box and their imagination to play with it for a long period of time. So that is actually using the imaginary faculty. So then today's society is concerned, especially in the teaching profession, that television, video games and internet, these forms of electronic entertainment might be having an adverse effect on the kids because they are not using their imagination to come up with the stuff to entertain themselves. And in this article that this student read, they're saying that those people who daydream actually are the ones that come up with creative ideas, discoveries and so forth. So daydreaming is a form of using this power here. In Theosophy then, we differentiate between fancy, fantasy, daydreaming and imagination. There's an article called Fantasy and Psychism in Theosophy magazine, volume 17, and this student looked it up, where fantasy is defined as a faculty by which images, thoughts, impressions are evoked from the storehouse of conscious or unconscious memory and automatically rearranged and dramatized into a never-ending series of stories or pictures. So that automatically this power in us, fantasy, operates where the ego is not in control of it. So the ego has no control over what we are doing with that fantasy. So we recreate things, but the ego is not in charge. So daydreaming then is a mild form of this fantasy, where the ego has intermittent control. Ego does not have any control, no control in this. So it is important to understand this differentiation, because we talked about the imagination faculty being present in human beings, but we have to also remember how the mind works. And without understanding how the mind works, this explanation will make absolutely no sense. In the explanation that was given, the mind works in two different ways, and we need to remember that. We always put the higher triad here, and the quaternary, which is our lower principles, body, astral body, passions and desires, in other words, our likes and dislikes, and jiva, which is the life principle, constitute the lower aspect. here we should like that life, passions, astral body, and physical body. This is this quaternary down here. This is Atma, which is a spirit. Buddhi is wisdom or spiritual discernment, and Manas is our mind. But when we are in incarnation, mind becomes the link between the higher and the lower, because it works in two different ways. One is when it pulls itself with higher aspiration towards its root, and the other one to its intellectual aspect, which is the personality aspect of us on earth. Both are necessary for the evolutionary process of humanity. But what they are saying is, by now we should have grown out of the lower aspect and leaning towards the higher aspect, which humanity at this time is not doing. So what we are saying is here, when we're leaning upward, the self has control over what we are doing because it's influencing us. But if we are leaning this way, it's intellectual. It can't control it. It's what we are doing on this plane, and we're not inviting the higher aspect of us to come in. So here is fantasy on the physical plane, and the ego, which is the self, does not have any control over what we are doing mentally in that aspect. So then fantasy differs from the faculty of imagination, in which conscious arrangement of impressions and images in the mind are present. Conscious arrangement. This quotation from Albert Einstein, where he said, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know now and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world, and there ever will be to know and understand. So he's putting a different spin on it, but it is, I think, has reality to it. He imagined himself continuously running alongside of a light ray. He was running with this light ray. He imagined the photon and he went with it, and that is when he came up with his relativity theory. So that imagination and that persistent dwelling on what it is you want to know eventually does bring success. And we see in historical events the same. Hume, that is a Scottish philosopher, said, fantasy helps us to move beyond our daily experiences and change present reality. And we know Leonardo da Vinci's fantastical flying machines paved the way to the Wright brothers, and the War of the Worlds by Wells inspired the first liquid-fueled space rocket. And then we have the Biographia Literaria of Coleridge, who was a poet and critic, where he distinguishes between fancy and imagination, saying that fancy rested on the mechanical and passive operations of one mind to accumulate and store data, while imagination held a mysterious power to extract hidden ideas and meaning from such data. So then we do use imagination. Most of us use it being unaware of it, because if we want something, we imagine it. We want to have a clear idea as to what it is we want, and if we persistently follow it, imagination gets stronger. There are a lot of other examples we can give, but I think that is sufficient. David Thoreau once said, if you build castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. But then he said, come back and put the foundation underneath it. Don't leave it as an imaginary idea, but make it real by putting a foundation to it. So then trained imagination can produce an actual image or form in the astral substance, which works as a mold. We all know that the astral body is present when the baby is formed in utero. So that is the model body, because the physical body would have nothing to be built on if it wasn't there. And that is what is present, and it builds it accordingly, according to the configuration of the astral body. Then the child is built from that. So then, from these statements, we can conclude that the imagination is the picture-making power of the human mind. And according to Mr. Judge, it can be trained. In the ordinary human person, it has not enough training or force to be more than a sort of dream. But when trained, it becomes the most valuable tool for humanity. Fancy is defined as the decay of the power of imagination, where there is mixing up of desire, the image, and the powers of the mind. Now, creative visualization, imagination, and lucid dreaming uses awareness and conscious control. In creative visualization, you're learning to imagine the desired outcome before you actually achieve it. For instance, they say that if you can't swim, imagine yourself swimming in your mind. You're in the water, paddling, sinking, coming up, sinking, coming up, but you don't give it up. You go to the end of that pool in your imagination. Lucid dreaming, you're aware that you're dreaming, but you control it. You're directing the dream in your dream. So all these are the creative powers of the mind, and you're using them. HPB says it is fear and wrong imagination that causes disease. This is very interesting. Fear and wrong imagination. That causes disease. Well, this is very interesting. Why should fear have something to do with it? What does fear do? It's a shrinking aspect of human life. It freezes us. It does not allow us to move forward. It's a shrinking tendency. And when we use imagination wrongly, we're giving impulse to whatever it is that is wrong to actually take place, because this is what imagination does. If you can imagine swimming and actually go to swimming classes and achieve it, then if you're wrongly imagining things that are not present and you're making them present, it will eventually come to you. It has that kind of power. So HPV says, take the fear out. What is fear caused by? Ignorance. If we don't understand it, if we don't know how it comes, then we're kind of, it becomes superstition. We become fearful of it. But if you know how things function in real life, and you know that it is just superstition, what is being said, you don't have to believe it on blind faith. You have reasoning powers. We can reason things out. And so HPV says, give it a different direction. don't go in the wrong direction, but give it a positive impulse to your thinking and your imagination. And she says this way we can get rid of 2/3 of our ailments in the world. Very interesting. So then, during pregnancy, women are actually very susceptible to picking up impressions from that astral light. Mr. Judge in the Ocean gives some examples, and HPV does too, where the mother picks something up and actually transfers it to the baby. And when the astral body is interfered with, where the limb, like if you come into the world without an arm or a leg, that means the astral body was interfered with, that the astral body does not have that limb for the physical body to be built on, so you come without of a leg or an arm. So the mother's imagination during that period has tremendous importance to the baby's formation in utero. It's the magnetic emanations that she's absorbing and reflecting onto the utero. So then, many magical phenomena, says HPV, can be explained on the basis of will and imagination. It is because men do not perfectly imagine and believe the result is that the magical arts are uncertain, while they might be perfectly certain. Look at this statement. So, if you truly believe in what positive imagination is, and you believe in the Kabbalistic definition of magical art, you can actually bring it about. And what comes to this student's head is one of those movies that Jason used to watch a long time ago when he was a kid, where Yoda says to the trainee, it's because you don't believe it that you cannot get the plane out of the water. So you have to believe it, but your belief is not blind belief. It's based on knowledge, not on any superstitious anything. And this is what HPV here is confirming, that if you believe it, then you can actually do it. You can bring it to life. You can make it real. And that the result would be perfectly certain. But only because we do not believe it is that, what are we not believing in? Our own powers. These are internal to each human being. We can cultivate it, is what she's telling us. So, there are two kinds of imagination, she's telling us. The higher imagination works from within without, and the personal man's imagination is mostly fantasy and fancy. The individual man's imagination, we're talking about the self or the ego here, is the plastic or creative power of the soul, and that is quoted from Isis Unveiled. It is described as one of the most noblest faculties in man. It is the human soul, we are told, manas, which is what she defines it as, the thinker aided by buddhi who uses imagination. And this is the true definition of imagination. It is the human soul, manas, human soul, which is manas, that uses imagination in conjunction with buddhi, which is our wisdom aspect. Very interesting stuff. Right imagination enables us to trace every deed to its archetypal soul. So they're saying that all of the mundane things that we do on the earth plane, such as waking, sleeping, eating, talking, they have their archetypal equivalents on the higher planes. As you know, we live on 7 different planes, and these are continuously giving impulse up or down, so we have it. So they're telling us that when we wake up in the morning, that we need to think of that and see what that really means. It means we are in manifestation, we're present. And when we go to sleep, that's non-manifestation, because we're going to a rest period. But at the end of life, these become permanent, because our duration increases in the sleep, because death is really a sleep. It is very unfortunate that the Western world has given it a different connotation, because it's simply a change of consciousness for the ego. Instead of being conscious in the physical body, it is conscious out of the body. It drops the body, but it has a refined body, because it is going to that devachanic rest period to absorb what was learned in that life, and hopefully it will come back out of it as a higher individuality with wider capabilities to help humanity move forward. So then bathing, it says, can be corresponded to baptism, and likewise talking and listening. What is it said in these philosophical statements is that we have to learn to listen. When you're ready, it is said, the master appears. It means that we have cleansed all our sheaths. The body is pure, its lifestyle is pure, its concern is unified for all life, all of the kingdoms, not just humanity, and its inner expression is then that it's going to become a helper of nature. At that time, when we have done all this work, the master or the guru appears. So this is what they're relating it to. Because until we learn to be listeners, Shravakas, that cannot take place. Listen. Why? Because the truth is never written. They write the truth as close to it as they can, but it is never given in a book form. Why? Because it is given to the ear. In other words, the inner ear has to be awakened, and the master's voice gives it to the inner ear. It's internal communication process. And until we learn to listen, all of the outside world's noise interferes with it. This is another connotation, that we have a quiet center in ourselves. Quiet center. What are they referring to? The heart, the inner heart. I think in the Voice of the Silence, it is referred to as Brahma Pura. Brahma Pura is that quiet center in the heart. And I don't think they mean this heart, even though this heart correlates with the astral heart, which is our real heart, the astral one. So this quiet center is there. What resides here? Krishna, or the Christ principle, that has been humanized and taken out all relevance to reality, because they made it a human being. Even though there is a one that came to help humanity, that is not what the writings refer to. So then, the manasic ego then influences, impresses, and inspires the personality through imagination. I'll say that again. The manasic ego influences, impresses, and inspires the personality. So that this true imagination is called sankalpa. I'll put it here. Sankalpa. A power that creates images by will, thought, feeling, or aspiration. And we take when we take this self-discipline, we actually plan or make an ideal plan or sankalpa and then execute it. Sankalpa means to form an idea or image. Where does it come from? It comes from the logoic center, because that mimicking, copying capability is present. If it wasn't present, we would never have it. So it comes from the higher realms. So sankalpa then enables us to imagine it, but not just leave it as imagination, but make it real by following through action. And what do the masters tell us? What you think or imagine that you are or you want to do means nothing to us, but what you do does. So action is what they want from us, not just we think that in the next century we're going to do this, that, the other, or in your next life you're going to come back and do this, that, the other. That is not what they're asking us to do. That is, they're asking us to become active now to the best of our ability. If that activity is even involved in just a smile, it makes somebody's day become alive and makes it go better, rather than with a long face going to work and making everybody upset around us. They're not asking us to do big things. They're asking us to do whatever we can in our daily lives to make other people's lives just a little bit better. A master writes, "Good resolutions are mind-painted pictures of good deeds, fancies, daydreams, whispering of buddhi to the manas. If we encourage them, they will not fade away like the dissolving mirage, but grow stronger and stronger until one's whole life becomes the expression and outward proof of the divine motive within." So when we come to earth life, then there is this divine motive of the egoic entity that is in the heart. But because the personality is not going along with its aim, we forget when we get involved in our daily lives, we are not really attuned to the core of our being. So that self becomes suppressed. And through this process of imagination and sankalpa, we can attune ourselves, it is saying, to that center, enabling us to express the life, what would be the right word? The life that you came to express from that viewpoint, not the personality's point. Name and form is not what we are. That is just something as a temple we occupy, because we cannot exist any other way on earth. But we have that inner life waiting to express itself, and if we allow it, it will do so, and our life will improve tremendously and move smoothly and beneficently forward. And last thing here, it says, will evokes spontaneous spiritual action when we have arrived at that quiet center. And even if we are not there yet, we need to ask ourselves, are my actions going to be beneficent to the other, towards whom it is directed, or are they going to be harmful? Is it just beneficent to me and harmful to the other? And we need to become conscious of that interactive processes, that when we go towards someone with some activity, we need to be aware that it needs to be beneficent. That is the starting point in this process. And when we use these truthful statements, it is stated that purity must be maintained at all times, truthfulness must be also complied with, and that brotherhood that we talk about, that unity, that we are truly brothers and sisters amongst all human beings, all these nationalities and so forth, where core of humanity comes from, is not concerned about, because we're scattered all over the world in different parts with different languages, different cultures, different attitudes towards life. But when all said and done, we're all one and the same because of that spiritual identity in the core of the heart. So we'll stop it here and answer questions. Yeah.
So I think you said imagination runs the gamut between the relation to the higher as well as the lower. For example, if I wanted an object on the lower self, I say I want a new car. I figure out a way to get it. If I dwell on that long enough, I figure out how to get it. But once I get it, I might be so old because I've dwelt on it so much, created so much karma, I'd be so old I couldn't drive it. Is that, from a higher standpoint, you are really guiding, you're being guided, you're guiding your lower self to become universal.
So you're asking that on the lower plane, you can think of your desire so strongly that eventually comes to you. But remember what we said, we defined the relationship between the higher mind ego and the lower mind entity, which is your personality, that when you are using sankalpa or true imagination, the buddhi part is active, it's guiding your effort. But when you are on the personal desire field, your imagination then becomes fantasy. And fantasy is defined as the faculty by which images, thoughts, impressions are evoked from the storehouse of conscious or unconscious memory and automatically rearranged and dramatized into a never-ending series of stories or pictures. So yes, perhaps you will, but what is it that you have achieved is what you need to ask yourself. Humanity at this stage is really enmeshed into substance, which is material. And in the explanation, there's a whole more stuff that the student could not deliver in such a short period of time. But it says that the inner and outer impressions are always active in each human being, whether you're aware of it or not. And when the subject and the object, what is the subject and the object? Let's define it. Object is what your sensory eye or ear, in our hearing and seeing, bring to you, and through that the brain sorts it out. So you're getting information from the outside world. And that reality is three-dimensional. What about the subject? The subject is two-dimensional because it is internal. These are interactive processes that are continuously going up and down, even if you are not aware of it. So that idea is two-dimensional, and your desire that you just gave this example with is one-dimensional. One-dimensional. So these are the three worlds that you're continuously dealing with. The only time the higher ego can come to your aid is when you use your imagination, sankalpa, for what? For the benefit of all. You're not self-oriented anymore. This little self we're talking about. This little self is your personality, and you cannot exist on earth without it, because your intellectual powers are necessary for your functioning every day. You know, you have to get in the car and drive, you have to go to work, you have to balance your checkbook. All those, this lower self, or the intellectual aspect of you, help you achieve. It's necessary. But what they're saying is, you don't allow it to take over all of the functions of the mind and not allow the higher to have any expression. Because if you don't invite it in at this stage of our development, it cannot automatically come. We showed it. Here it is. And this here is the connection between the higher and the lower. In other words, there's a bridge. What is that called? The antaskarana. You're going up and down through that antaskarana. It's a bridge. It's not automatic, right? And if you don't invite it in, it cannot influence you. Buddhi cannot influence you under any circumstances until your mind is attuned to charity and altruism. That's its quotation from all of the writings. In other words, you have moved away from this to some degree, that you have concern for the welfare of the others as well, not just you. I mean, they don't tell you not to take yourself into notice, but it should not be all of it. Because if you allow this self, it will take over. It becomes what? Sum total. This is HPB. Sum total. I can't write, sorry. Sum total. All of it, in other words. Do not allow any other expression for your higher to come in and do nothing. And eventually you become bound to it. All of your activity is like a squirrel. You're chasing your own tail on earth. It's not going anyplace. There's no spirituality in it. By the way, in her Genius, the article Genius, these are really beneficent articles for everyone to read. She tells us that intellect develops at the cost of the spirituality. That is also very interesting, that you can become an intellectual giant, but there is absolutely no spirituality left in you. But what good would that do? I mean, you have to think about this.
You have to have a certain amount of intellect to be.
Well, we just said we did. We just said we did. But if that is all you have, then you have become an intellectual giant. What is that going to achieve? What is it that you're achieving with that life? Because at the end of the life, nothing stays on that line of spiritual existence. What did you call that? The thread, the silver thread. The silver thread, where all of the residual spiritual aspects from each life is retained, because it retains it from life to life. Remember, individuality is almost seen at every incarnation. The personality only for this one life, but the individuality is there all through all of the lives that we have gone through. So it's the knower. It knows our true worth, what we are, what our faults are, what our good qualities are, what we have achieved, what we are working on. That is the Father in heaven, but it isn't in heaven. It's right here in your own heart. Yes?
So the example with the pool, swimming, if you're in your imagination, you're learning, practicing swimming, and then you have to make it to the end of the pool. What would an example then of fantasy be in that example?
In the swimming example, that you don't have to go take lessons and you have already learned it.
So is
without
is
practical aspect of it, it's fantasy.
So fantasy has no grounding.
Yeah.
Is that how it's different?
Because you're rearranging the events according to how you wish to put them together in your mind. And it becomes a fantasy. But it has its uses, because look what Einstein did with his fantasy of running along the light ray. He eventually came up with the relativity theory. So, but you have to make it practical. If you say, okay, I want to lose weight. Let's give another example. I want to lose weight. I want to lose, say, 50 pounds. And if you don't see yourself 50 pounds lighter, you're not going to lose that weight. You have to give that impulse to your imagination and to your mind that you're actually doing that work. But on the physical plane, can you actually achieve it without, say, cutting your calories down? Not dieting, but changing your lifestyle to fit into your imagination program. Sankalpa is that aspect of it where you become a programmer according to your imagination, but you're carrying it through into action, and that is necessary. So there is that internal and external that we have to be aware of. And it says here that all day long our senses are transmitting impressions from the objective to the subjective, that is from the physical to where? Psychic, which is where imagination is, and forwarding impressions from the metaphysical, which is the higher realm, to the physical planes of perception. And this is regardless of how we are using our life activity, consciously or unconsciously, it says here. So when our will is exercised, whether to the outer or inner impressions, then and then only do we see. Inner and outer, they have to coincide. So if you keep them separately, it does not become reality. We just talked about it. You have to carry it into action. Only when our will is engaged and rightly trained do we begin to see that the whole universe is a vast, wireless as well as wired system, and that our outer and inner senses represent the two phases of that system. If the outer senses give us the illusion of a three-dimensional world, psychical senses two-dimensional, will or desire one-dimensional. These are three different views or images, pictures, having their own reality. And it says that the soul itself is dimensionless, a fixed center of reception and projection of images. Fixed center. So that individuality is the fixed center because it is on the scene in every incarnation. But that was very interesting, this here. It says that in the olden days, the alchemists and Rosicrucians called something powder of projection. And what they had in mind was mercury. Let me put this up here so you can think about it. Mercury. Both the metal and the planet. And it says here, Mercury has a meaning little guessed at, though perfectly transparent to him who has learned to read even a little of what he sees or hears. Mercury, both the planet and the metal, symbolizes wisdom. And this is, of course, equivalent to self-knowledge here, without which we won't go anywhere. Self-knowledge. He who is in possession of this powder, it says, can register or erase any impression on any plane, can correlate the impressions of all planes, can project the impressions of one plane onto another, or withhold it. So, what is wisdom? Buddhi. And we said Sankalpa is the human soul, manas, imagining things with the assistance of buddhi and putting it into action. Well, we're just saying the same thing in other words. So this projection power then is the power of the soul when it has become what? Attuned to nature. It knows what's going on around it at all times because it's attuned to reality, not the illusionary part that we see through our senses and so forth. Very interesting. And then they tell us, imagination then is the projection in orderly or disorderly fashion of mind pictures that were previously registered. Those mind pictures in themselves are called memory. Imagination carries us forward to future incarnations, as memory carries us back to former ones. But when both are carried to their source, that source will be seen to be the perceiving soul. Yeah.
You alluded to a lot of, it struck me the analogy and correspondence which you're alluding to. The lower mind and the higher mind, the communication is there. When the students have read it, the master will appear. The idea of just the one word that you just erased there, listener.
Mm-hmm.
Listener takes on a whole new meaning when you think about all that, because we have to be capable of a way different form of listening than we think about.
Yeah, we said quietude.
Yeah.
Quietude. Quiet. Quietude. Is that it? Quietude? I'm not sure.
Quietude and listening.
Quiet. I'll put quiet
listening
there.
around.
Yeah, quietude is what we're talking about.
Right.
Because what they're saying is, if your ear is attuned to the external, you're hearing the world, but not the internal, your core. Until you reach your core, the master cannot appear, because that core is the same, is it not? The light in him is the same in you. What's the difference?
The same.
We're all the same. The light in each heart is the same as in my heart. This is where the brotherhood comes from. Our spiritual identity is the same. The personality is different. We all look different. Well, that's dependent on karma as to how you're going to come, what you're going to express, what kind of body you're going to have, what kind of mind you're going to have, because you have come to do a task. Whatever it is that you have come to do, all of the tools are there for you to do it with, if you will only coordinate yourself to the quiet center that is in the heart. This is the difficult part. Our society, the West, has become really noisy people. We don't know how to be quiet. We don't know how to meditate. We've forgotten all our primary qualities, because without them we cannot achieve a whole lot. So it is important, if we understand what this stuff means, to actually teach our children how to be quiet. Yes, we live in an mechanically advanced age, and we use all of it. Communication skills, computer skills are necessary for survival according to our societal norm at this time. But it doesn't mean we cannot cultivate the inner side of our nature at the same time as we are using all those external available technological advances. Because then, if you learn how to put this into effect, all of the technological advances can be used for the benefit of humanity. Because why did they bring this philosophy out? Because they knew that advances will come about, even further advances are going to come about. But are we going to use those to kill other people with, or are we going to extend life and use our material wealth beneficently for everyone around the world? Not become segregationalist, but rather unifying force in the universe. It's important to understand all that.
Bring people together.
Absolutely. There was an article, we should finish it. There was an article where it said that all of the nations on earth have something to contribute to the welfare of humanity. Maybe it is not wealth, but maybe it is this side of their nature that is cultivated, and they can contribute that the spiritual effort into the circle where it will augment the beneficence of the other side. So Mr. Judd wrote that article, I think, in towards the end of the 1890s, because he left 5 years after HB 91, 96 he left. So within there he wrote that article where it says that the West has to extend a hand to the East, and so that the two can get together and build a civilization on the structure that exists in the East. So our help is needed in building this structure, obviously, because of the modern technical advances over here, but without the spiritual side of things, we won't go anywhere. Anyway.
I forgot to announce this. Could you announce it?
Yes. There is a study session taking place at ULT in Los Angeles, California, between August 9 and 11, and we're all invited to participate. And their brochure is here, and it's also online. Thank you for coming.